Welcome to the Intrazone, a show about the... Hold on. This is going to be a special episode dedicated to SharePoint's 20th birthday, officially March 27th, 2021. This episode will teleport you back to March 27th, 2001, and everything in between then and now. If you're listening to this on the exact 20th birthday day, let me encourage you to join in the fun live right now. There's something for every time zone. Go to www.sharepointbirthday.com and learn how you can get involved, be in the second dimension, or if you want the full effect and you're super brave, hop into AltSpace VR for a rich 3D experience using a heads-up display. Our friends behind the European Collaboration Summit, Jugo and Spencer Harbar, have a ton of fun that they've planned. People telling stories, prizes being given away, lots of video and memorabilia. You should be listening right now to all of the live material. If you're coming to this after the fact, there's going to be a ton of stuff to get caught up on in the related blog for this episode. I'm going to put a lot of links to a lot of assets and, of course, all the fun things from 2001 all the way up to the present. In this episode, you're going to hear from a lot of people from behind the tech, those people that started way back when, even before it was called SharePoint. And I'm just going to give you a rundown of the people that I was pleased and privileged to talk to learn more about the history of SharePoint. You're going to hear from Jeff Teper, who is our Corporate Vice President of Microsoft Teams, SharePoint, and OneDrive on the engineering side. You're going to hear from Bjørn Olstad, who is the CVP of Fast Engineering, which means he and his team are behind Microsoft Search and Microsoft Graph. You're going to hear from Lauren Antonoff, who was an 18-year vet here at Microsoft. 9 or 10 of those were leading the SharePoint program management, and she is now President of Independence at GoDaddy down in San Francisco, California. Rob Lefferts, who worked for Lauren for a little bit, he's nearly a 24-year vet at Microsoft. And about 9 or 10 of those with SharePoint. He's now the CVP of Program Management for Microsoft 365 Security and Compliance. You know, one of our guests, Adam Harmetz, he's been on the show before. He is currently the Partner Director of Program Management of SharePoint User Experiences and the Developer Platform across all things SharePoint. And of course, Adam started in the Wayback Machine under Jeff in the early days, focused on ECM. You're also going to hear from 2 of our community members, Jugo, who is a co-founder and CEO of Nebulous and Teams Consulting. He's also one of the managing directors of the European Collaboration Summit and a Microsoft Regional Director and Microsoft MVP. And last, but not least, of course, you will hear from Spencer Harbar, who is an enterprise architect out of Edinburgh, Scotland, and he's commonly known for his authentication prowess and expertise, along with some amazing photography skills. Truly, Spence does landscapes right. And he too co-manages with Addis the Collab Summit. Both Addis and Spencer are also really some of the driving force behind the SharePointBirthday.com and the AltSpace VR experience for celebrating SharePoint's 20th birthday. It's kind of jaw-dropping to hear all of the different stories around SharePoint, both what it spawned for people's careers and what it did for the product and how much is built on that core, that technology that has been really in the cloud since 2013, a core foundation. Lots of change, lots of updates, lots of fixes and new innovation. But at the core, there's so much that's built on top of SharePoint and all the dependencies that it took of itself from the past, and now everything that's built on top of that. So I think you're going to have a real treat listening to everyone that I interviewed and really hear from them where it all started. And if you have even just a slight inkling of interest in SharePoint or anything that has been spawned from SharePoint, I think you're going to really like this episode. Just to set the context of all of the amazing things from SharePoint's early days throughout its iterations and all the things that were closely related and now deeply tied to SharePoint's history, I want to walk you through a timeline of SharePoint. So in the Wayback Machine of SharePoint's timeline, we will start in 1997 really through 1999. This is when Microsoft had a product called Site Server and Site Server Commerce Edition. Skip to 1999, SharePoint begins as codename Tahoe, connected to WebDAV, alongside codename Platinum, aka the next version of Exchange. 1999 also brought the Digital Dashboard Starter Kit. These were tools to help you customize Outlook 2000, already billed as the knowledge management solution from Microsoft. This also introduced Nuggets, which in the later days in its SharePoint instance became known as Web Parts. In 2000, we had the Digital Dashboard Resource Kit, aka Tahoe Beta 1, and this sat on top of SQL Server 2000. In 2001, we added a Portal UI to the Digital Dashboard Resource Kit, and SharePoint Portal Server 2001 was born. That is the day we're celebrating now, tracking all the way back 20 years. But there was even a little history before it. Also in 2001, Microsoft acquired Encompass and rebranded the product Content Management Server 2001. In 2001, there was a free Office 2000 add-on, Microsoft SharePoint Team Services, also known as the start to an online, extensible, collaborative platform. In 2003, SharePoint Team Services becomes Windows SharePoint Services, formerly known and commonly known as WSS, and Microsoft Office SharePoint Portal Server 2003 emerges. In 2005, Microsoft acquires Groove. This is a peer-to-peer sync technology that is the precursor to OneDrive Sync, and FrontBridge, and enters the hosting infrastructure market. Note, just for a reference, the Sarbanes-Oxley rears its head related to document and records management practices. January 2005, Microsoft introduces Hosted and Collaboration version 3.0, which includes SharePoint Services 2.0. In 2007, Microsoft Office SharePoint Server 2007, also known as MOS, combines the STS and the CMS offerings, and Microsoft acquires ProClarity and rebrands that as Microsoft Performance Point 2007, which would become the basis for BI from Microsoft. In 2008 to 2009, the Business Productivity Online Suite, or BPOS, expands to offer Exchange Online, Office Communications Online, Office Live Meeting, and SharePoint Online. And this was built using the core of SharePoint Server 2007 as the foundation, which much of the service would work around and introduce multi-tenancy. Also in this time frame, Microsoft acquires FAST, the precursor team and technology behind Microsoft Search. In 2010, SharePoint Server 2010 is released, and Groove is renamed SharePoint Workspace. Also in 2010, Steve Ballmer gives his famous "We Are All In" speech at the University of Washington on March 4th, 2010. In 2011, BPOS is rebranded as Office 365, and this goes along with SharePoint Server 2010 as its foundation, still pushing the term software as a service to describe cloud software. Live Meeting and Office Communicator are combined to form Lync 2010 Online, which is the precursor to Microsoft Teams. In 2012, SharePoint Server 2013, the Groove Sync technology is rebranded as SkyDrive Pro. In 2014, brings a ton of innovation: OneDrive for Business, Office Delve, Office Graph, which is now referred to as Microsoft Graph, and Office 365 Video. I also see this as the tipping point in the year where features begin to be developed and land first in SharePoint Online and then ported back to SharePoint Server vNext. And that vNext came in 2016, SharePoint Server 2016. In 2017, we introduced SharePoint Framework, commonly known as SPFX, Microsoft Stream, and Microsoft Teams begins to launch. In 2019, SharePoint Server 2019. In 2020, we brought Microsoft Lists and SharePoint Syntax, both rooted on SharePoint in Microsoft 365. And finally, in 2021, not only the 20th birthday of SharePoint, but we also launched Microsoft Viva, deeply rooted in the SharePoint core content services infrastructure. So that's a huge amount of technology, innovation, updates, rebranding. So much happened since 2001, but I hope it gave you a bit of a foundation of what has happened in those 20 years. But really, what happened in those 20 years, besides timeline and product names and what launched when, it's best to hear from those that were really behind SharePoint in the very early days, and some very much still with it. One fun thing that we've got in this episode is the happy birthday song, as sung by over 100 SharePoint engineers working on the product today. There is heart, love, and joy behind every garbled note and every lyric. So if you really want the full effect, you can check out the related video in the corresponding blog. But here in its full glory for your audio pleasure, happy birthday from the SharePoint team.
Happy birthday to you. Happy Good stuff.
So let's kick it off with Jeff Teper. Jeff is going to teleport us all back to 2001 with the release of Release Candidate 1 of Tahoe. Imagine loading from the shiny gold DVDs onto servers everywhere. Let's hear from Jeff in his 2001 words.
So organizations today want to ensure that the valuable corporate knowledge stored in documents, web servers, file servers, and email is readily available to employees making important decisions each day. SharePoint Portal Server is a flexible, off-the-shelf solution that can search and index the most important enterprise content sources across an organization and make that information available the company via familiar user interface. So spot on in the customer need and the solution we provided. Lots more machine learning and AI and cloudy stuff. Well, to give you the quick version, there was multiple projects going on in the company. One of which was I was leading a team that we created called PKM, Publishing or Knowledge Management, with a set of people that had come from the site server project. And the PKM team did a project called Tahoe, which was designed and is bringing together portals, document management, search into a single experience. In parallel, there was another project actually multiple projects with front page, the Office server extensions, and some early lists work. So as we progressed towards the release, we decided to give these things aligned names. So PKM became SharePoint Portal Server, Tahoe became SharePoint Portal Server, and the base collaboration offering became SharePoint Team Services. And so I led the Tahoe PKM SharePoint Portal Server team, and then a few years later led both teams. We saw this huge opportunity that basically back when we started, people were using file servers, which had pretty limited capabilities. And the notion of building websites in your company in intranet was brand new and required a lot of sophistication. And so we thought, let's build a server application that brings together website creation for your team, the ability to create dashboards, the ability to have workflows, the ability to search all those things. And so the basic idea, and it's funny, with this event coming up, I've wallowed in some of the original presentations we did and the words we wrote. And it was bring together, just as we brought together desktop tools, bring together server information management, but do it out of the box. So anybody could press the button and have a team website and a portal that aggregated these in minutes.
It's amazing how it already and still holds up even from 2001. A lot has changed, but at the same time, the roots and the core are very similar. So now let's dig through the earliest SharePoint memories from all of our interviewees. We're going to dig through their synapses and see how SharePoint made them fire like never before. And now, Bjørn Olstad.
So I think the journey started when we came in this, I think the marriage between SharePoint and FAST was great because we came at it from different positions, kind of how do you manage documents, how do you manage intranets in SharePoint, and search is a part of doing that. And we came in from search is the key technology for both algorithmic experiences and to find information, etc. So to combine them kind of makes a lot of sense. So kind of the first we were quite in the middle. This is back in the days when we had only on-prem software, at least focused on on-prem software. So we were in the middle of one of these cycles when we got acquired.
And now, Adam Harmetz.
Back then I remember first joining as a new college hire and being incredibly impressed by how thousands of people could all get their code ready to go on the same day. A huge feat of engineering. Impressive. Only a few organizations in the world could accomplish it. That was how software was consumed, and executing on that with predictability was an amazing accomplishment and exactly what customers were asking for, right? If the model is going to be helping IT organizations deploy and manage all these things, you want that level of consistency, and better or worse, it was just the way the world worked and us delivering exactly what customers are telling us they needed for that age of computing. And, the other thing about the on-prem age is that SharePoint was the center of gravity for enterprise solution development, collaboration, bringing all of Microsoft enterprise software together. Frankly, the roles that Azure as well as Teams play today. During that time frame, it was, obviously the server for Office. That came with an interesting responsibility, an interesting set of processes, an interesting engineering system that allowed it to scale to that. Then moving to today, it's very different, where I feel like I'm plugging into those big efforts at Microsoft, be it Azure, be it Teams, trying to make sure the scenarios come along, trying to make sure the code is reused in the right way. But I play a very different role than somebody like me would have 10 years ago, where SharePoint was more the center of gravity for everything.
And now, Addis Jugo.
I do need to admit I was forced into the SharePoint, which I did not regret too much until now, to a degree, but not too much. Back in 2002, I was still living in Sarajevo in Bosnia and Herzegovina. I had a software company where we had one of our products was CMS, custom CMS, which we have developed. But one of our main customers was City of Sarajevo. And we were obviously working a lot with Microsoft, with local sub, and with everything. And then they came to us. Before 2002, I had never public speech anywhere. That was interesting year for me in quite some aspects in that regard. They were like, well, for City of Sarajevo, because City of Sarajevo is has complete Microsoft technology stack, we need someone to implement MCMS for them, and we don't know anybody better than you. And I was like, but we have no clue about that. I have never seen MCMS. I have never installed it. Of course, I've got this MSDN CD somewhere in this MSDN subscription.
This is Spencer Harbar.
Frighteningly enough, my first memory was of things a lot, in terms of sort of the journey to it was obviously a lot before that in terms of, other Microsoft offerings before SharePoint was on the horizon. But I don't think I'll bore everybody with what happened when things were in black and white. In the color days, we were actually working or running a software development company here in Edinburgh who were working on some systems based on Exchange Server and custom XML-driven forms for a call center. So it's basically a call handling system. That company was the Microsoft Regional Director company at the time, and we actually were invited out to Redmond to show off this software. Of course, the company got all very excited about the prospect of showing off their wares to the masters, as it were. Whilst we were there, we were actually given a sort of preview of what was coming down the road with Tahoe at the time, SharePoint Portal Server. Team Services also wasn't available at the time commercially, but that was around that kind of time. And I didn't actually work then with the product for customers for a couple of years. Once SharePoint 2001 had come out, we'd actually implemented a globally dispersed deployment of SharePoint Portal Server 2001. If you can imagine such an abomination. But anyway, that happened using other third-party infrastructure solutions to make that happen, along with Exchange and a thing called Mobile Information Server, if anybody remembers that magic. And then had another break, actually, when I went back to my roots with things in the infrastructure space or security, effectively, before then really getting involved in a way that people might recognize in terms of my public stuff and things like that, much later on with doing mainly migrations from other platforms.
And now, Lauren Antonoff.
The super interesting engineering thing was the move to the cloud. I mean, this was revolutionary in my world as what then we call program management. Now in my world, it's more product management. I think Microsoft's sort of shifting in that as well. We used to think of things in these long time horizons where we would try to predict what the world was going to be like 3 and 5 years from now, and then build the right thing that would definitely be correct. We'd spend a lot of time debating that definitely correct thing. And then we'd ship it, and we really would have no way to know whether it was correct. And as we navigated the shift to the cloud, everything in our engineering practice had to change. The technology had to change. I remember these huge projects like database sharding, where we had to navigate these huge technical challenges to move to the cloud and scale in the cloud. But it revolutionized the way we thought about the product because it meant that we could actually make something live in a relatively short period of time and then understand how customers are using it, and then make changes and decisions in how we thought about where the value was or what the experience should be based on that versus hours and hours of debate.
Jeff Teper.
The CIO of Energizer 2007 said, I don't want to run this, you run it. And we said, well, that really won't scale if we try to run it for everybody. And you said, sure, well, if you do it right. Next thing you know, we've got Microsoft 365 with hundreds of millions of users. But that first customer, Energizer Holdings, that almost demanded us get into the what we would call then hosting, now cloud business, was one where thank goodness we listened to that one. None of the other customers were asking us to do this at that point, and I'm really glad on behalf of all our customers we listened to that one customer.
This is Rob Lefferts.
You can never have enough passion for talking to customers and empathizing with customers and understanding their worldview. And if you think you're doing enough, you aren't. You need to spend more time with customers. And just being belligerent about that is so valuable, especially in a space like security. And just to bring that to a funny example, so we spent all this time, like months and months and months, on icon overlays for check-in and check-out. I got over to security, and we're doing this feature that everyone is probably still afraid of around Windows information protection. And the team wanted to slap all these big icon overlays on all the documents to show that it was protected and whether it belonged to the company or the person. And the first thing I did was like, why do you want those icon overlays? Who's going to use them? Take them out.
And here's Bjørn.
Maybe the most rewarding for me in this now, 13, 14 years as part of the SharePoint team, working with the SharePoint team, is just like I think Jeff would say, what we actually acquired with FAST was the people. But it's the same way for us, kind of working with SharePoint is, yes, the product is interesting, but what is actually the most energizing is the people. Yes, Jeff has been my leader, but I think about him as family, kind of. The formation of this trust on individual level, not just between leaders, but between a lot of people kind of in key IC roles, that has continued for now we are in the second decade. And they are still, without being instructed by leaders on what to do, just working together and establishing kind of new cool concepts. So kind of that team feeling that SharePoint had grown under Jeff's leadership, kind of similar to a startup in a sense. There was this pride in kind of developing SharePoint, and we are a family, we are a team, we are not just randomly assigned to a project. And that atmosphere has been so energizing to be part of.
Let's switch gears and go through a reminisce that sometimes is a hard reminisce to do because I've asked each of our interviewees to describe one of their favorite features, and some found it kind of hard to only have one. So let's lead in and hear what Lauren's favorite feature is.
One thing that SharePoint did great and has always done great is it's not just a toolkit. It is a toolkit on which you could do anything, but it comes ready to serve customers and ready to solve problems out the door. And when I joined GoDaddy, a lot of website products came with, you can drag and drop anything you want, but there was nothing other than a fixed template that wasn't very useful. There was nothing you could kind of do out of the box. And we actually took a note from how SharePoint approaches things, which is, there are these common building blocks, and we're just going to let people use not squares and boxes, but chunks of business things like document libraries. We use that sort of same concepts to think about how would we tackle consumer websites, how would we tackle the kind of websites that we were creating with that same ready to deliver value notion that we used in SharePoint.
Adam Harmetz.
I'll pick two things. I would say, honestly, the modern page authoring canvas and technology is something I'm extremely proud of. It's our best product work. We just recently got our system usability scorecard and report, and we had awesome results. We make a little bit of improvements to it every month. It's been something that we've iterated on a ton, and I'm just so proud of the team. And I think it exemplifies what it means to build enterprise software in the cloud that will stand up to anything, even in the consumer space. And of course, it wasn't built in a day or with one big bang release. We've iterated on it, and we've been able to keep that code healthy and future-proofed. And so there's just so much to love about that. And then the second thing is that way back in my career, I still love the records router feature from SharePoint 2007, the Record Center file router, mainly because that was the first feature I got to own end to end. And so I can't say it's the most popular feature. In fact, I'm pretty sure it's deprecated or soon to be deprecated. Not announcing anything here. And I can't say it was even used all that frequently. But, when I joined the first couple of years, it was the tail end of a release. So I inherited a bunch of other features. And that was the first feature I got to own end to end from a speccing perspective. And it's really cool to geek out on. It's a feature basically when you submit a piece of content to the Record Center, it would route it and apply the right metadata by sending it to the right folder. And, it's basically like Outlook rules for the Record Center. And it was such a cool feature to geek out of. Like, we can all dream about the million things a rules engine for routing content to the right place could need. So I guess I'll answer two phrases in that sense. A feature with broad scale that I'm super proud of that is more modern, and then something from the bowels of history of SharePoint that I felt like I put my mark on.
Spencer Harbar.
The favorite feature is, I don't want this to sort of sound like too trite, but it's the core concept of the SharePoint site lists and libraries. And the reason I say that is that, that might, that's boring, that's simple. But we have to remember there isn't another product now or at any time in the 20 years that has had that approach. Now, there'll be some infrastructure people giggling now as they listen to this, because, it can be argued that approach has some pretty significant ramifications in terms of scalability and geographic dispersion and so on. But nonetheless, if we look at the timeline of SharePoint over the 20 years, the business problem effectively that it's trying to solve at its heart, at its core, remains the same. Sure, there's changes in circumstance and changes in technology, but the fundamental business problems it's attempting to address remain the same, remain as challenging as they always were. So I'd have to say that's the thing that is my favorite feature, because it's sustained the product all this time. If SharePoint was a grab bag of different things, all just shoved into a box and shipped out, we would not be here celebrating its 20th birthday, because that product would be site server that lasted for about 3 or 4 years. The thing that keeps SharePoint is that core. So it's definitely my favorite feature.
Lauren Antonoff.
OneDrive always existed. Document libraries were there from the very beginning, but evolving that to be something that could stand on its own and that was really rich enough to meet the needs that customer have. I'm very attached to OneDrive. And then specifically guest access. I remember being in a meeting with a customer and they were yelling at us because too many of their employees were using Dropbox. And that was our fault. And I thought that was great. I said, it's definitely our fault. So when it's your fault, you can do something about it. And we took that spirit and we said, it's definitely our fault. Let us do something about it. And that led to a lot of great innovations in SharePoint and then ultimately OneDrive.
Rob Lefferts.
I'll do the one that I love because I'm weird, which is content types. and content type inherit. And I don't love it because it's awesome. I mean, I think customers have built an incredible amount of value on top of it over the years, but I just love it because I still want to fix it. Like just a couple weeks ago, I was thinking about how inheritance should have worked in content types and what I could have done to make that better and how I made it too complicated. And if only I'd listened to Steve Rayson, it all would have been better. So there's that one. And then the other one, actually, this is just came up recently. I'm on self-host Windows all the time. My machine shut down for one reason or another. I actually think this one might have been user error. I reopened my device and all of my documents had been saved. Everything in there, like I lost no state from any of that because all my content was up in SharePoint. And it was just this moment of like, we did some good stuff.
One of the things that I wanted to reflect on to learn how did SharePoint really shape the industry. We've learned already a lot about the product, favorite features, and where things started, but it's also important to know that SharePoint had a huge impact on the industry, other technologies that were derived from SharePoint, directionally how people learned and what was working for SharePoint and what they might have done differently. So let's hear a couple of perspectives on how SharePoint helped shape the technical industry. Spencer Harbar.
And something that I noticed on virtually all customer projects was it was the first tool that most end users had been exposed to that sort of forced them to work as a team. So most companies prior to, unless you were a big oil company or a big famous beverage company, that kind of thing, we'll call them Contoso and Fabricam. If you weren't that company, the only things that computers inside the organization have been used for as a PC was very individual, working on a spreadsheet that maybe you send it on email, or maybe you'd be using a HTML-based intranet to do things, and there might be the odd form for requisition or so forth. But for the vast majority of tasks, it was very much, an individual does something, then it gets passed to somebody else, and then, and so everybody's working in a silo. And SharePoint did change that inside the enterprise, at the least, to try and to not to say that lots of people didn't use SharePoint in the same way. Of course they did, but for people who were successful with it, it was generally a change in the culture of how teams collaborated together, working on a list, two different people editing the list at the same time, different items, and that not being a problem. That's a huge deal. And then you move it way further forward about 10 years, and you're talking about things like Office web apps, co-authoring, and obviously now to where we are now, where everything can basically be being done at the same time by a group of people.
Lauren Antonoff.
We never knew what industry it was in. I cannot tell you how many hours we spent trying to answer the question, just what's the simple answer to what is it? And I don't know if you guys have solved that since I left, but, I think SharePoint is one of those very early suite products. It is one of those early products that part of its benefit is that you can have a single solution to a bunch of problems. And by combining those things together, it made the IT department's life easier, and it made users' lives easier, employees' lives easier.
Adam Harmetz.
If I had the story arc, I think it was important we adopted the cloud early and started that learning journey before most of the rest of the industry. That's a bet that worked out well for us, but I hope it worked out well for our customers who were betting on us. So we learned where the future was going. We helped create it. And by that, customers that were with us on that journey were in a stronger position to succeed and thrive and achieve more.
Jeff Teper.
In 2008, we did an acquisition of a team in Norway called Fast. It gave us a supercharged search engine for SharePoint and has evolved to build a lot of the graph and people features in Microsoft 365. And that Fast team with folks from Bing, folks from Microsoft Research are now doing sort of cutting edge machine learning so that you get recommended content in teams and search is personalized just for you. You can see the thread from Bill's vision through the first version of SharePoint Search to the fast acquisition to now things like Viva Topics and those topics showing up in Teams and Office and Outlook and so forth, powered by SharePoint. Definitely a journey there. And we now have the technology with AI and machine learning to make it a lot more relevant to users.
Addis Jugo.
I'm integrating over 20 different products and technologies, not necessarily Microsoft products and technologies, with SharePoint over the past 14 years, because it actually started in 2007. This whole considering SharePoint being kind of surfacing platform for all different technologies which were in background. I was surfacing SAP data with SharePoint. I was surfacing the data, all different kind of stuff in SharePoint, because this is where the people were. This is where the collaboration took place. This is something we need to keep in mind. It was SharePoint that drew such an attention that the people and the businesses and the business units and our customers were telling, we want this in SharePoint.
An additional thought from Spence.
I think most people of our vintage, as it were, to coin a phrase, were doing something else before and had some path into SharePoint. Whereas now, of course, because it's such an established sphere, a lot of people are coming in as it almost effectively their first job in IT, which is great. That's a testament to the success of the products.
Let's keep it rolling and get into what I like to call Jeff's special question for each interviewee. So these questions you'll hear me prompt were ghostwritten for me by Jeff, directly intended to be asked of each individual. He knows these people from a long time ago and obviously knows some of the core of what little special sauce questions should we prompt them with. So this is kind of a fun section where we get to hear, through Jeff's questions, more about each individual and what they did in the Wayback Machine. What was DLC?
Document Lifecycle. I think it was the beginning of SharePoint as we know it today. In fact, in the old days, there was a period of time where there was multiple SharePoints. There was the SharePoint collaboration that had come from one product front page. So that was like one SharePoint. And then there was the SharePoint that had come with Jeff. So I would say those were like the predecessors to modern SharePoint. But modern SharePoint really, I think, started in that collaboration around the document lifecycle.
To Rob, Captain Jeff wants to know, what was the hardest part about being the GPM of WSS?
So there's the unsatisfying answer and the broader answer. The unsatisfying answer is W stood for Windows. And that meant that I was the guy on point for negotiating this bridge between the Office division and the Windows division about how we were going to ship code inside of the Windows box. And that got us totally sucked into a nightmare of antitrust stuff that went on and on and on and on. And so the other answer is actually, it speaks somewhat to like what is hard about being a platform. And WSS was really interesting because it was a platform for a bunch of stuff that got built on top of it. And it was also an app. Like we had to build experiences for lists and web UX at the same time. And that tension is always just a real tough strategy to manage across.
Jeff's question to you, Bjorn, is, have you achieved your goal from the Fast Forward conference where all UX is fast driven?
I think it is like all the good goals. It's impossible to achieve them, but it's possible to make substantial progress. And I think partially, yes. If you think about the vision of Office Graph to kind of collect all data and signal, kind of that grew from activity that in the start was fast driven, the partnership with SharePoint, but has grown to become E+D wide and is one of kind of the forming ambition. And you could say that the core concept in that one is the same thing that was the fast forward vision in 2007, that experiences should be algorithmic and they should be informed by intelligence. And it should be possible to optimize them, so you optimize for business outcome, whether that is relevance for me or a user, or if you're a shopping site that you actually buy as much as possible, etc. And you need the relevance function, not the binary function. All those were the reasons why you need to transition out of the database, read data, present them, and do a transaction in a sense.
What was your favorite moment at Star Wars Day?
The May the 4th feature a SharePoint event?
Yes.
I remember vividly walking from the hotel to the venue, first off, a lot of nerves. A lot of the company was betting on us, but it also just put into relief for me. Honestly, when we were doing next-gen portals, it felt pretty good, but it didn't necessarily feel like the company needed to bet on us. It just felt like, hey, we were one more app we were producing. And as we constructed the Future of SharePoint event, and it was clear we were building a content management solution for the cloud, like that is existential to the company's future and to customers betting on us. And I remember walking to the venue thinking, okay, just this sense of, oh, wow, how many people are betting on us for this to go well, including in our community, right? And so that is what I remember the most. That, and they actually made us put on makeup before we got on because we were under these big stage lights, which I had never been part of before. But let's go with the first answer.
So let's round ourselves towards home with some final thoughts on where SharePoint is now at 20. And maybe even a peek into the future of what we know of the past and how that references where we're going into the future. This is Spence.
It forces you to actually have to think things through a lot more, make some concerted decisions. Of course, there's a negative to that. SharePoint project generally will be more political than other products because there'll always be competing people who say, oh, you shouldn't be using that Microsoft stuff, you should use Oracle, blah, blah, blah. And, you've got to carry that person through the project and try and get them on board by hook or crook. But nonetheless, just generally in terms of you are almost always building something on top of it or building something else to support it. Very few people have vanilla SharePoint. I always laughed when a customer would say, we just want out of the box SharePoint. It's like, okay, so an empty SharePoint site collection, that's what you want. Sure, I'll do that for you. But, an empty site collection is no use, right? Another aspect of the community, if you will, is it did change the way an IT project would deliver collaborative solutions because it almost always involved you needing to actually speak to the users of the system.
And now, Bjørn.
Now, I think in a sense, my kind of challenge for the future from a product perspective in Microsoft is a little bit to productize what has been the people experience with SharePoint. If you take in the people effort, it's about kind of how can you create trusted relationships that are meaningful, that you use as a foundation to achieve more. That's more kind of the vision statement for our people work. And in some sense, that kind of inside Microsoft, kind of working with Jeff, working with Adam, with Dimitri, with everyone across the SharePoint team is for me that trust and that depth in the relationship. You can just see evidence after evidence that forms the foundation for new innovation. So that has inspired me, and I think kind of to what extent we can actually support those processes of constructive collaboration between people is one of the most valuable things we can add to our software, not just how to draw text on a digital white paper, but actually make people trust each other and kind of how to form meaningful relationship and achieve things together. So that is kind of my future kind of ambition, how to make progress on that. But I think kind of the embodiment of that has been the partnership with the individuals and the team in SharePoint.
An additional thought from Jeff. This year, we know that SharePoint is 20. Next year, SharePoint will be able to legally attend one of its own SharePoints. Do you have any worries about SharePoint as a 21-year-old?
No, I'm more bullish about SharePoint than ever. I mean, I think one of my favorite things is fueled by all these applications and the shift to the cloud from the pandemic. In 2020, SharePoint added more cloud users than the previous 10, 15, 20, if you want to go back to the beginning. So we jumped from over 100 million to over 200 million users in 1 year. And the number of releases we're doing in SharePoint, again, OneDrive, lists, things with Power Apps, things with Viva, and on and on. And also just little delighters. We just introduced, the SharePoint app bar, new views on calendars. So, these features of SharePoint just are going to get better and better. So I think SharePoint is older and wiser, but 21 is a good age because at 21, you're still peak performance, running fast, and SharePoint is definitely not slowing down. If anything, it's accelerating based on the support and learning we've done over the last 5-10 years with Microsoft 365.
And now, a patented voice from a woman with many patents, SharePoint's very own Cortexian Naomi Moneypenny.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear SharePoint. Happy birthday to you. From good friends and true, from old tech communities and new. May good luck go with you, and happiness in the cloud too, and many more.
Thank you all for a wonderful 20 years with SharePoint, and tip of the hat to the next 20. It too is the community's birthday, so I say happy birthday to you, and many, 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 many more. You've been listening to The Intrazone, a show about the Microsoft 365 Intelligent Intranet.